Hey, it's Diego, founder of BumpingIntoLove.com. What do you do when there's all this life and relationship advice everywhere you turn? If you and I were to sit in a room and throw a coin, we'd hit at least 10 life coaches. And you and I know everybody and their mothers is a relationship expert. If you change your Facebook status, what happens? Instantly, people are drawn to that drama. They go and they ask you, they comment, they try and find out what's going on, they try to give you their advice, even if it's not based in any psychology or any science. So we have to be able to navigate through that terrain. You know, in the 60s was one of the most notorious experiments that have ever been created. It was by Stanley Milgram. And I want you and I to experience that as though we were part of the experiment. So let's say you opened up a newspaper, you see the ad, a few days later, you find yourself sitting in a waiting room. And you're having a conversation with a person next to you, you're having a laugh, and a person opens up the door, a person in a white lab coat, and they call you and that person into the room. And they say that you're going to be a teacher. And this person that you were just having a chat with, he's going to be a learner. And so you say goodbye to this learner. He goes off into an adjacent room. And what you know is he's going to be connected by a set of electrodes to this box that's in front of you. A box that has several switches on it, ranging from 15 volts at one end all the way to 450 volts. 450 volts, mind you, is a lethal dosage. And what you're going to do in this moment is you're going to ask a set of questions. And if that person in the other room answers incorrectly, that person you were just chatting with, you're going to administer an electric voltage to him. And right before this experiment kicks off, that person in the white lab coat, he's going to tag you with a voltage around 45 volts. Doesn't feel good, does it? So you're going to start that line of questioning, and that person in the white lab coat is going to go and sit in the corner of the room. You start asking the questions. Pretty soon, you start electrocuting this person in the other room. And you hear him, ow, ugh, zzz. Pretty soon you've passed 45 volts. You get to around 90 volts and you can hear this person through the room. And you hear him screaming. And you get to a point when you feel this emotional pain. And you think, what am I supposed to do? And you turn to the person in the white lab coat and you ask him, you say, I don't know that I can keep going on with this. He's obviously in pain. Should we have somebody check on him? And he says, the experiment requires you to continue. And you think, okay. So you go again. 150 volts, 200 volts. This person's screaming at the top of their lungs. They're telling you to stop. And you turn and you ask the guy in the white lab coat, I think we should stop this experiment. This person is obviously in pain. And he says, there's no long-lasting damage. The experiment requires you to continue. And you feel confused, you feel uncertain. But sure enough, you continue. You get to about 300 volts, and you stop hearing the person in the other room. You feel like you've killed them. And you turn to the person in the white lab coat and you say, can somebody check on him? I don't know if he's doing okay. And he says, if that person hasn't responded in 45 seconds, you can take that as a non-answer. Electrocute. And so you go ahead. Do you think you'd be able to go all the way to 450 volts? Potentially killing that person? If you're like the science experimenters of the day, they thought 0.1% would be able to get to 450 volts. You know what happened? 65% of people administered the lethal dosage of 450 volts. What Stanley Milgram proved in this experiment was that in a moment of confusion, we listen to an authority figure. And what's funny is that we were always the pawn in that experiment. That person in the white lab coat, he was just an actor. And the person that we were having a laugh with in the waiting room, he was an actor as well. You see, none of that was actually real. But in that moment of confusion, we assumed that person, just because they were wearing a white lab coat, they had a little bit more confidence than we did. We listened. And so the same thing happens with life and relationship advice. So there's 4 things that I found that you need to do when you're confronted with moments of confusion. The first one is to filter the advice and possibly filter the friends that you have giving the advice. Because you're going to hit those moments of confusion. You're in places with relationship, places with other people you don't understand totally, people that might dump you, they might cheat on you, they have all their own issues. And because you hit a moment of confusion, you look for an authority figure. And in that moment, anybody that's a little bit more confident than you is the authority figure. And they might be well-intentioned in their advice. So they come up to you And in that moment of pain, in that moment of confusion, you listen to them. And what is it that they're saying? You have to be able to filter that bullshit advice. You have to be able to look past the instantaneous moment to look into the future. To say, if I take this advice on, is it actually going to serve me? Because you have to be very careful between something that feels good and something that's actually helpful. They're not necessarily the same. If you're in a moment when somebody cheats on you and somebody comes up to you and says, well, you know what? All men are assholes. Or this woman rejects you and you think all women are bitches. That might feel good in the moment, but it's not necessarily helpful. You need to find something that's helpful, because that's no different from you feeling hungry and somebody walking up to you and giving you a marshmallow. Is it going to satiate you? Yeah. Is it going to feel good? Yeah. But what if every single time you're hungry, somebody gives you that marshmallow? Are you even going to arrive 10 years later? So you have to think, not only am I going to nourish my health, but I'm also going to nourish my mind. Which brings us to the second step. Always nourish your mind. And don't wait for the moment when the shit hits the fan, because it's too late by that point. That's not the way the brain just resolves things. Reach for the self-help book before you get to the moment of pain. Surround yourself with good influences. Influence your mind constantly with great advice. And do it when you're in a place of rational thinking. You know, I often say that my advice is secondary to what you feel. So get to a moment of rational thinking. When you're having a great day, pick up the self-help book and say, does this feel right for me? Is it something I can actually take on? Does this sit right for me? Is it part that I can feel in my heart? Is my intuition on the same side as this advice? And if it's not, discard it. That's the second piece. And the third piece is to take on more than just one person's advice. You know, by all means, invest in yourself. And I'm in the space of positive thinking and helping people and psychology and self-help and all that stuff. But if I look at my experience, I was always listening to more than just one person. So I know that I should be marketing my products, my events, and all that stuff, but I have to be truthful. You have to listen not just to my advice, but listen to other people. Take on other opinions. You know, if you have a serious health issue, you don't just listen to one doctor's advice. You go off and you listen to another person's. You get secondary, third, tertiary opinions. Same thing happens here. Now, the fourth thing is, this isn't just something that you're doing for yourself. Because when you start experimenting and studying this stuff and actually becoming so filled with this advice, when you're in a rational state of mind, when you feel it intuition-wise, when you feel it in your heart, you take on that advice and you can help somebody else that's in pain. Because I promise you, not only are you going to feel in pain in moments of confusion, but so are your friends and your family and your loved ones. And somebody's going to walk up to them in a moment of pain and say, well, all men are assholes. All women are bitches. And you could be that person to step up and say, you know what? I know that you mean well, but that's bullshit. Because this is what's really going on. You know? And, you know, I hope that this message resonates with you. I hope I can be the one person in your newsfeed when there's so much pain in the world that can send you love, that can give you advice, that comes from scientific psychology, that comes from places that I've actually experienced in my life, and something that resonates with your heart, with your intuition. And if so, I'd love for you to not just like this video, well, that's awesome, but also like the page, so that way I show up in your newsfeed. And if nothing else, I hope that you can resonate with this image so much. I think it's to each one teach one. You know, if you can go out and help the world by sharing this, to communicate the message of love, of happiness, so that way somebody knows how to filter through this minefield of advice, because there's so much of it out there. So remember how to follow through those pieces, those 4 steps that I communicate in this message. I hope this resonated with you, and as always, don't forget about a thing called